I'm recording.
Can you hear me now? Yes, it does.
Excuse me, my crayon is a monkey. I find the conversation
Taking some interest in learning a bit more about technology, philosophy, and I like to.
I'm an educator.
Absolutely. We're going to stay anonymous.
That's a cop out.
The binary's gone. I thought jingle was like Dutch for cheers.
Hello everyone, welcome to Beyond Binary. Today we're going to look at social media and tech companies. Today we're joined by Craig. Would you like to introduce yourself briefly and let us know what your speciality is?
Sure. Hey guys, thanks for having me. So my background is I've been a programmer and a developer for a really long time, probably the better part of 40 years now. Started when I was about 10 years old back in the 80s. And in the past 15 years, I've been specializing in search engine architecture. And what that means essentially is anytime you go to a website that has a search box, there's algorithms and relevancy and all that stuff that goes on underneath. So you get back what you need to get back through e-commerce companies or whatever. So that's what I get hired to do, is come in and develop the back end of search engines. And that's going to lead into probably, I'm assuming, what we're talking about, me designing search engines after that.
Absolutely, yeah. So a few topics we're going to touch on today. I think one is having recently watched The Social Media Dilemma, and everyone's talking about that. So it'd be interesting to talk about not only how these tech companies have a grip on us, but have a grip on the economies and the problem with monopolies in this space, what we can do as individuals. A few things to touch base on. So just to check, has everyone watched The Social Dilemma? And what was everyone's thoughts?
I did a little experiment after watching it. I used Facebook and Instagram and I thought, I wonder how addicted am I really? So what I thought I'd do, I like little challenges like this. So I thought, well, I'll deactivate them. I said, well, what about a month? See how easy it is or difficult it is. And so I've been doing that and it's coming up to about a month. It's been really interesting. It wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be, but I did find it's like, when you forget your phone and you leave your phone at home or something, and then you feel like there's something in your pocket, maybe vibrating, and you go to check and you're like, oh, it's not. No, I left it at home. So you get this like ghost sensation of maybe you take a photo or you discover a new song and you have this impulse that you want to kind of share it. So instead of doing that, I would send a message maybe on Facebook Messenger. So I kept that. I think it was very dramatized. I'm not really used to watching the news, so the exaggeration was a bit intense.
Well, that's very typical American style documentary. And that's very, I feel...
Up to 11.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like drama.
Yeah. It was quite intense.
So for me, I think I've never really had that addiction to social media, to be honest. None of the apps really ever grabbed me that intensely. So for me, it's an addiction to my phone more than an addiction to social media. Frequent message boards a lot, which is sort of slow social media. It's a different vibe. But in general, I'm just addicted to looking shit up on the internet on my phone. But the documentary did spell out some things that I was personally already feeling might be happening. And it sort of laid it right out in front of me. Is it true? I don't know. But it was kind of the feeling that I was having, that the effect of social media was having on society.
Yeah, so I'll kick off before handing over to a much more experienced and knowledgeable guests. I'm definitely addicted to Facebook, without a shadow of a doubt. A number of times I've been up at 2 a.m. arguing with some random stranger because they're wrong and they need to know.
They need to know it, and we need to know it.
They need to know that I'm wrong, and everyone needs to see me have that out in public. It's been interesting watching me and my dad both go on divergent and extreme paths. I've just shifted left and left and left and left. And he's gone the other way. And to the point where, we've had to stop talking politics this year because it's become so toxic and problematic. So that's stressful. Like, it's worrying. I think a lot of the people in the documentary, anyone that's been familiar with the tech space, these guys have been like Chicken Little, ringing the alarm bell for a number of years. And the funniest thing I found about it all was like at the end when they were like, but what can be done? And they were like, you should turn off notifications and you should take a break every few hours. And you're like, no, I think you need to dismantle these massive monopolies. But that's also a good idea that you suggested. They're just shrugging their nothing can be done, right? And you're like, no, a lot can be done. Just if a company's too big for governments that they're getting scared of it, then something needs to be done soon because they're only getting bigger. Anyway, Craig, I'll hand over to you. What did you think of it?
I've been in the tech space for a long time, and I worked in Silicon Valley during the first dot-com boom. That's where I kind of got my feet wet. But I was going to say, I didn't actually get a smartphone until probably 2 years ago, which is very late to the game. Certainly I had a cell phone. I had one of those Samsung Juke, switchblade phones for a long time. And I avoided getting a smartphone because when I spent time away from the computer, I truly wanted to be like away from it. And I saw like a lot of people's, behaviors on social media and constantly checking the phone and that kind of thing. I ended up getting a job that I had to get a smartphone because I was traveling between United States and Canada, and my old one literally didn't work when I went over the border. So I had no phone at all. So I had to get a smartphone. Then once I did, I absolutely fell into that same trap, and I knew that I was going to. So, to your point, I've definitely fallen into that same thing about being addicted to, checking my phone and Facebook, social media especially. And I'm contemplating going on that same route that you've just talked about, taking a bit of a break on that, because I wonder, the time that I'm spending, is it truly beneficial to my well-being, my happiness, getting me riled up over something that's really not that important, in the long run, that kind of thing. And then switch over to the documentary. There was a couple of takeaways I had from that. And one of them was that I think with tech companies and with the legal system, particularly here in the United States, I don't think that they're really in sync. And I think that the tech companies are kind of pushing to, I don't want to say necessarily get away with things, but maybe, try to do things to maximize their market share, their viewership, the stickiness of their applications, all those types of things to maximize their revenue, essentially.
Peter Thiel, 0 to 1, he has this beautiful analogy where he says, like the way the tech companies define themselves, and you can compare like what they say to investors versus what they say when the government anti-competition commission is investigating them.
Oh, right.
They talk to investors like, we are everything.
Yes.
We are everything to everyone. And when they talk to government, we're like, we are so small and humble. Like, please do not touch us. We are little. So, and the truth is, demonstrably, Facebook, Google just took over media. Right, like the death of so many forms of media, absolutely, from television to newspapers, has just been replaced by these tech giants who are like, oh, we just do the search, and people just like their family posts. You're like, yeah, you're so much more than that. You've completely usurped media in most formats. Like, you're huge.
Right. And, the other point too, as well, is, you mentioned what can be done at the end of that documentary. And one of the things that came to mind for me is like, it's not a really easy, there's no really easy answer to this. I mean, certainly things can be done, but part of the thing that we were discussing before we started is that once a company has that large of a market share, it becomes kind of this evangelical following, and they can do no wrong. And even if they do, they'll still stay. So it's almost like even if, another platform does come out, they don't necessarily have to be better. They can be an alternative. And the end user, is maybe dissatisfied with, platform A. It'll take a lot to get them to move to platform B.
But we've seen it happen.
Yes,
I mean,
of
here
course,
in Holland, we've seen social media sites in the 90s, early 2000s make their way for Facebook, right? So Facebook has served a lot. Instagram is taking over. Unfortunately, same company, right?
Well, that's the point, though, right? It used to be competition, and now Facebook are just at a point where they're like, "How many billion do we have to throw at it?"
But it's more than just a specific company, because it changed what media is as well. Because before we had curated media, we had specific educated journalists working for very specific companies, curating the news content that we were getting. And what social media has done is giving everyone an amplifier. It's you can't almost distinguish anymore who is the informed journalist and who is just the uninformed idiot screaming into an amplifier. And in that space, people are getting lost.
And the algorithm works both ways, right? So we all know when we post something and get loads of likes, we've been trained by the algorithm how to write on these platforms to get better engagement, right? And it is different, like what does well on Twitter versus what does well on Reddit. It's very different feedback, right? And it tends to attract different audiences because of that. But likewise, like when I'm writing a blog now, I will use software which will advise me which words to tweak so it's better found by Google, and then and then you get split test, two different versions of the blog, and you get feedback from that, which one people linger on longer. And so sometimes I feel like it's like AI is teaching me what to write, so that the AI of a search engine will find it, so that it will show it to people, and then like I'm kind of less and less of a role in this thing.
Yeah, it's just the AI
Right.
trying to cheat the other AI.
Pretty much.
Soon you'll just get AI for searching, so it'll be 3 AIs just competing with each other.
Talking to each other,
Yeah, but there's a lot of benefits though.
Well, I wonder if that's kind of crafting what you're writing according to what it feels that the human response is going to be like. So really, it's more so the de facto of the mass, the status quo kind of thing that you're going to get the best response from, possibly. I don't know. I haven't heard of that software, but it certainly sounds possible and interesting, and it must know at this point.
I mean, these things come in waves, though, right? So you can spot a early 2000s BuzzFeed headline, right? It's such a cliche now, like 8 things to revolutionize you won't believe number 7.
Right.
We move past it now, and people are sort of craving a bit of authenticity. To be fair, I did feel, as one of the most Facebook addicted people I know, I did feel last year it was starting to dwindle. Right, like I noticed that it was like less and less people active on the platform, and it was the same people getting louder and louder.
You see the same stories as well, cycling over and over again, and you think,
and more and more outrage driving headlines, and you're like, this is just getting ridiculous. But then obviously, this is 2020, and so suddenly everyone that was quitting it has had a lot of downtime and a lot of free time, and so these platforms are flooding back again.
But there's interesting changes that they make, like the recent stories gets more and more hidden with every update, right? Whereas I prefer to see recent stories, because if I'm on it checking 2 or 3 times a day, I see the same, and I'm scrolling down, I think I've seen this already. So you click on recent stories and you see the new stuff. Yeah, okay, it's different. And then,
but as I say, that might just be a symptom of less and less people playing on the platform.
Yeah, you're right. It could be. Yeah.
Before we get into the murky world of dystopian futures where we're run by monopolistic corporations, Craig, you've done a startup which in some ways is competing with some of what Google does. So like, talk us through how you go about that, and sort of how difficult that journey is.
So, like I said, my background has been in search engine architecture for about 15 years. And through that process, I've certainly had ideas of creating what are called vertical products or vertical search engines that are specific to something. Like, for example, maybe a travel search engine is a vertical search engine because it's just for buying plane tickets or that kind of thing. What I thought was, about 2 years ago, I was doing research on closed captions in videos for accessibility issues for people that needed videos with closed captions. And so as I was looking around, I noticed when I was doing searches on Bing and Yahoo and Google and DuckDuckGo and pretty much everywhere, all the videos that I got back when I did video searches were from YouTube, which wasn't completely surprising because YouTube is so big and they've been around for so long. But it made me wonder, who else is still out there? What about Dailymotion and Vimeo and Veo and MetaCafe and just all these guys that I knew of going through, the process of watching the web grow from all those years? Kind of blinked and they all went away. So I started looking, and sure enough, they were still there if I went to their site or the resources directly. But I thought to myself, I was like, this is really weird. There's all these sources out there, including like Twitter video and Instagram and TikTok and just tons of these. But I'm not getting them when I'm going to the video search engines, even Google Video Search. And Google Video Search did arguably have some videos that were from like news stories, but most of it was pretty much YouTube. So I said to myself, I designed search engines. Why not create something, proof of concept, real quick, with say maybe 10 different systems in it that cater highly, if not almost entirely, to non-YouTube sources. What would that look like? What would the results look like? Because my goal is to get diversity outside of YouTube itself, not necessarily compete with them, but it's kind of like maybe a different grocery store or something like that. You just get a different variety of different types of things that maybe you weren't aware of, or. So as I started doing this research to find out who was still out there, I found out that there were new players. One of them, for example, in the UK called BitChute, that came up in the wake of a lot of demonetization and deplatforming on YouTube. They decided to make their own video upload service similar to what YouTube does, but with a wider net, so to speak, of what they allow content-wise. Because YouTube can be kind of ambiguous in their terms sometimes that people have complained about, or strict in very specific types of ways that people weren't expecting. And so they came up. And then I found another social network called minds.com that's kind of a crypto social network that's more liberal, and a few of these other ones. And so I'm like, they all have videos. Why not put them in? And so I developed this video search engine essentially for people to be able to find videos mainly outside of YouTube. The initial goal within the first probably 6 months to like less than a year was to have about 10 systems and maybe 10 million videos. Here we are about 2 years later. We have almost 600 million videos across, I want to say, about 74 different sources. So as time went on, I found, well, there's a YouTube competitor in Iran. There's a Facebook competitor in Russia. There's the whole world just kind of opened up as I did all this research, which was furthering my point, being like, wow, I didn't even know these things existed. Why not bring all this stuff back in one place? And then when the end user uses the video search engine, they'll discover all the stuff that they didn't even know was out there, which I think is kind of what the internet is for. So that's the semi-long version of creating that. Yeah.
No, it's brilliant, and I think it's really important to have that diversity and to avoid a monoculture, right? Like I've seen the comparison, just in general business terms, to be like the difference between a tropical rainforest versus just a orchard growing only one type of tree, and the problems with that monoculture. At the same point, like anything that's been banned or deplatformed, like, how do you stop it becoming a platform of ISIS beheadings and
that's an excellent point. So in doing the research, every single platform that goes into the video search engine that I've created, which is called PeteyVid here in the United States. Peter is a very common name, and the nickname for that is Petey, P-E-T-E-Y. I'll get into how I named it that in a minute. It actually has to do with my cat. But in getting into choosing these platforms, I decided I needed to choose the platforms that would go in. Not the videos individually, but the platform itself. And so in going through them, I would go to the platform and say, okay, like how ridiculous is their content? How extreme is it? Do they have pornography, for example? Those kind of things. Because the one thing that I definitely wanted to disclude was, straight up adult content and pornography, because part of my feeling is, I'm not against that medium personally. It's just that I think for porn, when people want that, they know where to go. I don't necessarily need to include that yet.
Yeah, it already seems to be well catered to.
Yes, it's not something I need to even address. So, and not only that, my idea too was, if I'm going to be presenting this product as a possible use case or something that could be used, say, at a university or library, it needs to be as clean as possible in that aspect, because that's an obviously no kind of thing.
Right. And so some of the curation that we were talking about, that's so important in this.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And so my theory in designing the search engine was, I will let the platform itself do its own due diligence and curation and let them have their standards, and then I'll make the decision of whether that platform gets in or not. I can only think of maybe one platform through all the research that I did that I had to say no to. The only other one were a couple of different ones that simply their culture was much different, like VK, for example, is in Russia. And I'm not completely convinced that this is the case, but I made the assumption that within their culture, it was acceptable to have a certain level of erotica and pornography side by side with like a music video or an instructional how to bake a cake video or that kind of thing. Whereas on YouTube, there's no way they would allow that, So what I decided to do was not, throw the entire system out, but create some type of relative filter. So, as much of the porn didn't get into our search engine as possible, but all the other stuff did. So is that to say that it's as clean as it possibly, could be 100%? No, absolutely not. But I've done the best that I can to, the first line of defense kind of thing. But to answer your original question, there are one or two platforms that do have some content that could be considered, derogatory or those kinds of things. Some people might even consider Alex Jones to be inflammatory, for example.
What's the internet rule where, like, hang around long enough and someone will call everyone a Nazi at some point?
You're right. That's a very wide net in some cases. That's not necessarily a beheading video. It's, there's a whole gray area there. But what I would say is, the one site that I did have to like not include was specifically for violent content, just for that entirely. And so that I couldn't do. So as far as some other ones that are incredibly like more on that liberal side, if they happen to have some things like that, what I've done is created in the terms on the website to say, if you want this to be taken out of our search engine, just send us a link and we'll go ahead and take it out. So we're letting the users kind of dictate that, rather than an algorithm, rather than keywords or that kind of thing. And we haven't had any takedown notices for up until like 2 days ago. And the one 2 days ago was actually an advertisement from a company, an Italian company, who didn't want their advertisement shown, which no problem, but it wasn't violent. So I hope that answers your question, but yeah.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's a difficult problem, right? Because you have people crying out for free speech, and then these platforms have to decide whether they're censoring one side or the other, and that's become a big thing in the recent election. The Trump fans claiming that Facebook and Twitter were censoring some of their more outlandish conspiracy theories. You also have, these companies that get so big and are in so many countries, and especially with Facebook, sort of took their eye off the ball probably in terms to like monitoring. So a whistleblower inside raised the red flag and said, look, there's genocides happening in these countries, and they're being advertised on Facebook, and we're not doing enough about it. And that's a massive problem. You then also, if you say user-driven, right, like reporting content, that has been abused by certain Twitter mobs who will just like try and demonetize every video someone produces on both sides of the argument. And then to make things even worse and more complicated, there's this big concern that the more legislation people put in place, the harder it is for a smaller startup to comply. So if you make a bunch of rules to be like, okay, like now Facebook has to do this and Google has to do this, well, they can afford to comply.
Oh, I see.
The new startup will struggle to jump through all those hoops. And so what you're actually doing is stifling innovation and stifling competition.
Right, because not to interrupt, but I was going to say that could force a certain level of, further investment that would be needed to buy licenses for software that could perform those actions, or employees that would do the filtering, or, that kind of thing. Oh, absolutely, yes, to help them understand that.
Or lawyers
absolutely.
to help with all of the law cases. And
Could you not have could we not invent some kind of sliding scale of how much the regulation applies? Because at the moment it's like, if you're a massive corporation like Google or Facebook, you basically don't have to pay any tax or really adhere to any kind of laws whatsoever. You just move country, which seems completely upside down, right? Surely it should be the other way around. It should be people like you, Craig, with a new startup. You should be exempt from too strict regulations. And then as your company grows, you then are held more accountable, because then in theory you have more resources to manage these things, right?
and more
responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. And a bigger responsibility, exactly. So you start off and you say, well, if you're a new company, okay, it's you can pretty much do what you want, more or less. And then as you get more users, more turnover, whatever, you then become more liable to this regulation.
That sounds incredibly. I think it sounds incredibly,
scale.
feasible and logical. But I think the problem is for anyone to settle on the set of circumstances that would dictate that. I think that's where you get a lot of kickback. And how do you validate that? Yeah,
it's also rarely the small companies that have the biggest lobbying power. So might be slightly.
But I mean,
cynical.
politicians can just change that, right? Like, it doesn't need to be lobbied. Like, we could just suggest it to them and they go, that's a great idea, we're going to do that.
It hasn't happened so far, although the tide seems to be turning. So I've heard the Democrats are growing tired of Silicon Valley's bullshit, based on some articles I've read. So, well, I mean, the big problem is like these huge tech giants. Like the idea is the bigger a company gets, the more jobs it creates, right? But that's not necessarily the case for a lot of these tech companies.
Well,
I think that. No, go ahead. You're good.
No, it seems to me that Facebook has been having a problem letting the algorithms filter the content, and having to hire a lot more people to do this manually, to look at the actual content that people are posting. And with billions of people posting content, that's quite a lot of content to review if your algorithms can't really pick out what are the bad apples. And to me, it seems surprising that the problems we're having is mostly with political kind of opinions. Because if you look at art, the algorithms are doing quite a well job. I mean, I've been getting a lot of good art stuff, music through the YouTube algorithm. There's an entire music scene, the lo-fi house music scene, that was generated by a YouTube algorithm that started picking up these really obscure records, pushing it to people that it knew these are tastemakers, these are connected to this kind of vibe, and suddenly start to pick up millions of views, small artists becoming known through a YouTube algorithm. And that's not a bad thing. Why does it go... Yeah, why does it go wrong with political stuff like QAnon? Right? That seems to be where our issue is, mostly in the political sphere.
It does, yeah. Anything related to fringe or conspiracy theory, or that's definitely that, yeah.
And that's where you're seeing these spaces move, right? Like, I think Twitter has just banned, and Facebook have just started banning most political stuff because it's just becoming...
Well, and I think at a certain point, Instagram literally turned off hashtags because of the election that was going on here, because they didn't want hashtags to affect any of that. I'm pretty sure that happened a few days ago.
I mean, it's already crazy that Twitter is putting a banner underneath Trump's tweets, right? That's quite a new reality as well.
It's not a ban. It was
so funny.
News media is having a banner underneath the speech of a president. He is lying to you right now.
Yeah,
Please don't listen to him. That's something I've never seen before.
I was like, oh my god.
So maybe there's a switch now. Maybe they start taking it more seriously. There does seem to be a bit of a change this election cycle now.
It's interesting that you say that, Marang, because that was also one of the recommendations from the Social Dilemma. The idea was fact-checking the sources of an article before you share it. But maybe that puts too much onus on, the sort of time people have available. You know what I mean? Like, maybe us lot, maybe we and our listeners would be more likely to fact-check. But do you think the average person is going to fact-check?
No, the proof is no.
So I kind of agree with...
Ask Chris and his dad. Ask Chris and his dad, right?
Half people... Well, no, but here's the problem. Like, whose facts? Like, from which source? Because, like, I have facts to back up my opinions, and he has facts to back up his opinions. Like, I mean, I think more of the problem is that a bunch of people out there who... I even asked them, like, oh, I will read the article they've shared. And I'll be like, yeah, but no. And they're like, I didn't read the article.
Yes,
like
that's very common. Well, yes, because it's triggering, and that's what people like in a way, yes.
So my point is this, right? There's also different qualities of facts, right? Okay, no, I don't want to say like everything opinion is fact. That's not what I mean. I mean like, there's different types of claims to be made. Like some are more factual, some are opinion pieces that maybe are based on facts. So I think if we have some kind of box, especially with Craig, you were mentioning like fringe theories, conspiracy theories, surely this is a great candidate. They do it on Facebook. I just have a little box below that says, probably for like fake news, and then it has a link as to why it's fake. Do you know what I mean? Why it's rubbish.
Right. You know what? I seem to remember like less than a year ago that Facebook did have something that came up. It was a little like disclaimer below it saying that you might want to check this, but I haven't seen it in a while. Do you remember seeing that?
Yeah. I definitely saw it, and it was on there for a while.
Yeah, no, it does come up with fake news warnings. The last couple of months have mostly been like anything to do with politics at all, and clearly there's too much volume for Facebook to do the fact checking. It just goes, if you'd like to know like some factual information about the election,
I see.
link
In
here.
general,
And it just did that for almost every post because it was just like. Yeah.
Or some of them, I've seen ones where like it's clearly like a doctored image or just a faked image. And then it's like blurred out like you would have with like graphic content, right? And then you'd click to reveal if you,
yes.
Do you know what I mean? Because it's made up. So in the same way that like there might be something that's quite bloody or gory or whatever, some violent content, and you think, I'm choosing to see it, and I know what is in store for me. I know that it's either not real or it's fabricated or it's violent or whatever it is. That's an interesting way. So you can choose to get involved or not. But maybe it makes you click more because you want to know. That's
possible too.
Do you know what I mean? So it makes it the full fake news more alluring.
Craig, I'm curious. Like, as someone that's started a software startup, like, is there much regulation? Is there much red tape? Are there many things you have
There's
to be
really not
careful about?
much. I mean, obviously you have the GDPR that has to do with cookies and privacy and, things like that. But besides the obvious ones, which is, posting any kind of content that's absolutely illegal, child pornography or things that are obviously completely, forbidden on the internet entirely, it's pretty light.
And I presume as you're not liable for that as long as you have a mechanism to remove it once reported, right?
I would say yes. I mean, I think that there's a fine line there, because if someone engaged in like pulling a feed in that was known to be harmful directly, then I think that you would be liable, because you've made that choice, without a doubt, that it's literally coming from a source that is, but, as far as anything beyond that, there's certainly the initial point of, having the option to take that down, or, that kind of thing. So, but as far as the initial red tape, not a whole lot really. And I think that most of the time when something does come up, there is typically what's called either some form of notice or a cease and desist that happens right off the bat before anyone gets, lawsuit happy right out of the gate.
The big one tends to be copyrighted
Right.
music, right? And the irony is that will get pulled down a lot quicker than an ISIS beheading.
Yeah, that's
Well,
the
imagine.
DMCA, yeah, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that came out in, I want to say between like 1996 and 1998 here in the United States. It didn't, there wasn't a lot of enforcement of that right off the bat, but then it became more and more of a standard, and now it's pretty much like, if that gets issued, it's yes.
It's
yeah.
automatically
And Google's
picked up
engaged
even.
too with that. So, yeah.
I shared a video with, I think, AC/DC's
Mhm.
Thunderstruck, because it was the Polish protests, and the government were comparing the young people protesting to Nazis. And the person at the news station was like protesting this and being like, this is nonsense. They were like, just because of the lightning symbol, which Nazis had too. They were like, and the guy at the news network that was meant to make this collage comparing Nazis to these kids was just showed like a bunch of ridiculous things with like lightning in, like My Little Pony, and was playing AC/DC Thunderstruck. And anyway, so I shared that video because it was quite famous of like the main news station in Poland getting hacked by an insider. And immediately, like on Hitting Publish, it was like, oh, Sony Music
Right.
has a copyright DC whatever against this content. Like, wow.
Yeah,
They
well,
are quick on that. And I've
Absolutely.
noticed
No, you're right.
actually-
You're absolutely.
Sorry,
And
go
I've
for it.
done the same thing with uploading video. That if the video even has a few seconds of like even a small, just few frames of a sample of a song, it knows immediately. And that goes back to what I was saying about having to make that initial or that additional tech investment. As a small startup, you can't really afford to buy the licenses for those software, the softwares that will do that. Facebook has to recognize those, or like YouTube has to do that. That's hooked into those libraries from Sony and Universal and all these places to protect those kind of things automatically. So that's more of a burden on smaller tech companies, because they don't have the ability to necessarily either buy those or to, then they have to manually enforce those things. Whereas it probably saves a lot of money the other
and
way.
that's
Yeah.
often what naive, well-meaning activists don't realize is that the more rules you make, right, like the more you shore up the position
But
of
should
these
this
big
be-
monopolies, because
Should this
they
even
can
be
complain.
a company's responsibility? Should this not be maybe a government or maybe a worldwide kind of API thing that any company can call to? It does a check for you.
You make a good point, right? Like if the record label is concerned, why don't they make an API for it? Which, let's be honest, we're probably at that point now. Like it's so widespread, these copyright notices, that protesters have started playing copyrighted music on a boombox behind someone saying something controversial, and then none of those videos will be able to go
I
up
didn't even know that.
online.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. It's like life hacking, really. Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. You get like these really extreme political party rallies.
Yeah,
with,
and as long as that
people
music's
with the
playing,
boombox,
it doesn't matter how offensive what they're saying is, it will be able to be hosted somewhere. But if you play that music, can't go upload online now.
maybe on BitChute it'll be there.
True.
Yeah.
So, Craig, with that in mind, like tying together these few tangents, do you think that the answer is more legislation, or do you think that would be damaging?
Well, I think I'm a fan of a certain point of legislation, not necessarily on that really granular point, but more so on the definition. There's something, and I don't pretend to know a whole lot about this. I'm just now getting into it late to the game, but Section 230 is what's being argued about whether, say, Twitter is, say, a publisher or an editorial, or it's where they lie like as their entity, that will end up dictating a lot of their behavior. And that's what more so what I'm a fan of, because I think if that can be reeled in and the organization can be classified as a certain type of classification of an entity, then they will have to have certain, boundaries, kind of thing. And
Yeah, and as you said earlier, they are claiming to, oh no, we're just like a post-it board, and you're like, no, you have
right, which borders on being an editorial, and yes,
news right now. Yeah.
So I think that's more so a bigger point to start with, is to define the organizations and their limitations and what they're liable for and all that within the scope of how they're currently behaving. And not only that, I would say probably a more specific or granular terms of service that defines very specifically what's allowed, what's not allowed. That's something that people have complained about with Google in particular quite a bit, is that they've said, oh, well, this is, against our, user terms of service, but no one can find anything that's specifically related to that. Whether it's someone putting too many emojis, in a chat conversation during a live video, and then all of a sudden the video gets banned and the users get banned because they use too many paddles, or, all these ridiculous stories that you hear. Certainly having a more clear and concise terms of service, and having a more clear and concise definition of, the limitations and borders of the organization itself, I think would help reel some of that in, rather than really, really small tons of, small legislations, I guess. That's more so I think what I'm a fan of, at least for now. So,
and surely it's possible, right? I mean, EU's trying to do it with GDPR, trying to protect user data.
Mm-hmm.
We can legislate internationally if we want to, and if we understand what we're doing with the technology, which still also an issue
key, right?
in
It's
EU.
very early days,
Like a lot of the people
Yeah.
deciding in the EU are very old people that still do not understand the nuances of the technology they're ruling around.
There's embarrassing videos, right, of some center being like, so what is the Facebook?
Right, and this goes back to kind of what I was saying about our legislation and legal system being very out of step with where tech companies are right now. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just
The GDPR thing you mentioned, Moraine, was really effective. Right now, I mean, the spam has gone, basically, right? I don't know about you guys, but spam now, it doesn't really seem to exist. If you, unsubscribing
GDPR
is
has
way
been
more
quite
effective
an
than it
impact
was.
on the internet.
It's been
in the
pretty
EU.
effective, I think.
And globally, because a lot of even companies outside of the EU have EU users, so many EU users that, we'll change our system entirely to accommodate for the entire world, because to have two different ways of operating makes no use either. So legislation in just the EU changed the internet globally.
Yeah, it was a good example of how...
And the
it
same
affected
goes
it
for
in a
legislation in
positive
the
way
US,
for the
of course,
users.
that has a global effect as well. Maybe simply because a lot of these tech companies are American companies. Which is interesting as well, because we're getting the Chinese tech rise as well, right? They've got now, a company that's challenging the Chinese government because they've become so big due to the QR code payment systems. None of you heard about this?
I'm unfamiliar. Yeah, I'm interested though. I knew about Huawei and all that stuff, but not the QR stuff. No.
So this is a offspring of, I think it's AliExpress, and they were the payment provider for AliExpress, and they became so successful they spinned off into their own company, and they own now so much of the payment flow in the entire of China. Everyone in China is paying with QR codes for everything. Your monthly rent, anything you buy, anywhere, it's all QR code based. It all goes through apps. They get credit through apps. And this company has become so big, it's the government is scared of it.
I mean, you'd be bigger
How
than
does
the
this company
banks,
make
right?
the money, though? How do they make money?
Ooh, don't ask me about that specifics. I'm not an economist.
It's the same as a bank, though, right? If you take a fraction of everything you process, normally, you don't charge the customer, you charge the supplier
Oh, and it could just be
for the convenience of the payment.
yeah,
Same
it could
as a
just be
credit card
interest
company.
on credit that they're giving, right? They grow their user base and then they charge interest on credit. And when you have sorry.
So then what was... What was the reaction of the Chinese government?
It's still ongoing. There's a situation ongoing in China, right?
I mean, the Chinese government aren't famous for their transparency. But we're getting to an interesting point now where America, for a little bit, was talking about setting up its own Great Wall like China had done, especially with, as you said, Craig, Huawei. So for a little bit, it looked like Huawei was going to be installing 5G networks around the world. And then things got a little bit Cold War economics, and like that got banned. I think Britain said yes to the deal, signed it, and then was pretty much told by the America that they weren't allowed to have the deal. TikTok might get broken apart. There's all these things. There was a big problem with
by whom? By the Chinese government.
Well, no, if TikTok gets banned because it has enough Chinese investors, so if it gets banned in the US from the Apple Store, that's going to have a massive effect on it. And there was a big case with the gay dating app Grindr. It got acquired by a Chinese company. Now, they said, with ties to the government, but what in China isn't tied to the government, right? You can't exist outside of the government's control in China. But yeah, arguably, and it was, I think, one of the most common ways for spies to corrupt someone in the old Cold War days was back when everyone had to be like gay in private and hide it. If a Russian spy could find out that you were gay, they could use that against you to get some information. And so the Americans were really concerned when a Chinese investment company bought shares in the gay dating app Grindr, because they could use that to have something to threaten all these senators with who were gay dating in secret, right?
If they were that worried about it, surely they could just come out and be like, actually, it's fine to be gay, don't worry about it. Like, and then everyone's happy. You know, everyone's happy then.
Surprisingly, that's not the way the Republican Party played it, but it's a nice suggestion.
Yeah. That is really interesting, isn't it? And do you think China are going to have more and more power over this kind of these apps and websites and stuff in the next kind of 50 years?
I mean, for now it seems China sort of copying and playing catch up, right?
Well, the question is this going to break through into the Western world, the non-Chinese world? Right. This is what these companies are going to try to achieve.
There's been a few attempts. Right? Facebook tried to do its own payment system. That got broken up. So far, the banks have so much power in the West that they've been quite good at stopping upstarts. So although the tech companies have destroyed media, anytime they've stepped into banking territory, they've met a lot of legislation, red tape, and resistance, right?
Which you think is a result of the strength of the banking?
Yeah, you see who has the power, right? I mean, arguably the only reason Rupert Murdoch didn't break up big tech, although he may have had the power to, is because he tried to get involved in it himself. He acquired MySpace for however many billion and then lost most of that money a couple of years later.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the thing with the cryptocurrency move with Facebook, because I didn't know where that actually ended up going. It kind of just disappeared, and I assumed that they just abandoned the endeavor. But I know there was a lot of resistance from a lot of different organizations, especially people within the banking industry and lobbyists and things like that. But I really wasn't aware what happened. So
yeah, it seems like there's just too much resistance, and Facebook has too much to lose to risk getting in trouble. Like, I think famously, the PayPal mafia, as they're called. Another quote from Peter Thiel, and I think Elon Musk said the same thing as well, is like when you're starting up a finance startup, the last people you hire is lawyers, because they'll tell you can't do it, it's illegal. This is a brilliant quote by Peter Thiel. It just tells you how Silicon Valley mafia operates. They're just like, if you hired lawyers, they'll tell you it wouldn't be possible and it'd be illegal. So don't hire lawyers. Just move fast, do the thing, and then become so big that then government has to reckon with you, so they can't stop you. It's quote. And you're like, wow, that's telling.
Yeah, I was going to say, on that note, I just watched the PayPal Mafia documentary on YouTube probably about a month ago. It was really fascinating. And I had no idea some of the backgrounds of those people. And, a lot of people think that Elon Musk just single-handedly started PayPal, which is not the case at all. in that documentary. So that was really revealing. And then, some of those guys went on to be a part of starting YouTube, and it's really great. Yeah.
What was the
It
name
was,
of it?
yeah.
Just the PayPal Mafia. Great. I'll check that out.
So should we check that out on YouTube or on your
Oh,
video
well,
platform?
I don't host any videos.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you might be able to find it in a bunch of different places. But yeah, certainly that's where I watched it, was off of YouTube. So, yeah.
Yeah, could you tell us about the name of your platform?
Yeah,
and
so-
how
so-
people can use it if it's
It
available
is, yes.
publicly.
I mean, the
I'm
site's
not sure
live
if
now.
it
It's
is.
been live for about a
Let us
little
know.
over 2 years. But my goal was just in a couple of weeks, well, maybe it was like less than 6 weeks, to come up with some kind of proof of concept, create the framework for it and make it work. But I didn't really know what I was going to call it. And so all my focus was on the tech side of it, creating it, creating the proof of concept, and not necessarily what it was going to look like or what it was going to be called. But I started getting close to that point. Came up with a whole bunch of different names. They were either too technical or too silly or made no sense. Started looking at domains. They had all been squatted or, like I said, made no sense and had no memorable, ring to them. That type of stuff. And so it just became really difficult. And the squatting thing was especially annoying, because by the time I did come up with something, I'd go and find it, and somebody had already bought the domain. They probably wanted a few $1,000s for it. So didn't want to do that, because I didn't know, if things were going to fly anyway. So kind of gave up. And I said, you know what, this will just come to me at some point in time, maybe like it does for some people with like band names, or who knows. Sometimes when you let go of something, and all of a sudden in the middle of taking a shower or whatever, you'll just hit you. And so it wasn't long after that, my cat, who's a ginger orange cat, came up and he was hanging out with me, and he's my favorite of my cats. And his name is Petey. He's named after a character in a TV show here in the United States. There was a Nickelodeon show called Pete and Pete, and it was about two young boys with red hair got into these strange adventures and stuff. And so, yeah, and so that's where my orange cat came from, was being named Pete. And so what I said was, you know what, people like cats, they like mascots. This has a ring to it. His name's Petey. I'll just make it shorter for vid instead of video. And sure enough, there was no domain, and there was a domain available, and there was no usage of this term, which is important too, because when you do your research on the internet, you want to make sure there's not another product or another whatever with the same name that people get confused. And sure enough, there was nothing. So I called up a friend of mine who did a lot of work for cartoon horror magazines and things as an artist. And I said, hey, I want you to make a cartoon version of my cat, but not too childish, but not too like sci-fi, somewhere in the middle kind of thing. And so that's where the whole name and concept and all that came from. And Petey has his own Instagram, so I put lots of pictures of his day-to-day life and, him doing different things. And because I figured, you know what, why not make a brand out of it? Something that's a bit more memorable. And then the privacy thing came into play after that, because what I thought was, okay, I got this video search thing. I'm going to be able to show you stuff from all different places, even different languages. Got the cat thing going on. That's cool. I really like what DuckDuckGo is doing, and in relation to some of the other ones like Search and Encrypt, and there's a whole slew of privacy-focused search engines, which means they don't save your information and they don't monetize that and rely on that as a revenue stream or share that with third parties. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned
Right.
DuckDuckGo.
That's the bigger one. Yeah, but certainly there's other ones.
So, but
Probably
is, it,
about.
is there thus an issue then? How do we solve the issue of moving the crowd, right? Because we do have alternative versions of many
Right.
of the tools that because the phone, right? You were talking before about you didn't have a smartphone until recently, but a
Right.
phone is a really handy tool to have, and especially when you're traveling, I find it can be really handy to have a phone with internet on it to communicate with people, find maps, where you're going.
Absolutely.
So how do we use this tool without getting lost? And we have good services, right? We have DuckDuckGo, your video for web. There's many good services, some open source, but the crowd is not moving towards
Right.
those services.
It's absolutely, that's a huge problem. I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but that goes back to, kind of part of the conversation, what I was saying, that, some of these larger brands have worked so diligently to have, this massive market share, that once that market share is there, getting them to even recognize or try something different, very difficult. And I would imagine this exists in maybe the beverage market, maybe, other markets too as well, like with Uber and Lyft and things, of that nature. Or
but the beverage one's a great example, because if you look at how it works, these little shops, right, they get the fridge for free, which for a small shop is quite a big expense covered. And when Coca-Cola delivers the fridge, they'll be like, there you go, you've got your free fridge. By the way, there's one string. You never sell Pepsi ever.
For beer, it goes further than that. Here in Holland, the breweries own the bars.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the owners of the bars.
If you go to Ireland's the worst for it. Like, Ireland's the worst for it because Guinness is owned by one of the two biggest breweries in the world. The name's like Av in Bev, something, because 12 companies merged together, and so the name doesn't make any sense anymore. But yeah, obviously everyone goes to Ireland and wants Guinness. And so the company that owns Guinness says, okay, but you can only sell these 4 beers. Don't sell any of our competitors.
Wait, so
and it just becomes this monoculture.
So obviously this is
wasteland
happening, across the board with a lot of businesses. So once that's achieved and they have their market share, or like I said, their evangelical following, so to speak, how do you get the end user or end consumer to try or switch over to something else, or even embrace it, or even try it in any manner? Because the thing is, what I'm doing with the video search portion isn't really competing with anyone. It's just kind of a value add for anyone that wants to find information outside of what they're already used to. So it's not really a complete alternative. It's just an additional resource.
Yeah, it's
right.
More niche, isn't it? It's like you don't have to keep trawling through the YouTube
right, and
videos.
To the effect of your question too, in the first probably I want to say 3 weeks of me talking about and starting to design this, a friend of mine, I was talking to him about it, and he said, well, I want to ask you, play devil's advocate. He said, what if I said, well, I really like YouTube. Why should I use your search engine? And I told him, I said, well, I thought about it for a second. I said, you shouldn't. You should just keep using YouTube. Like,
if you really like YouTube,
right? But so my hope is, and I'm sure DuckDuckGo and some of these other places, their hope is that there will be certain percentage of the tech population, or the population that uses smartphones or the internet devices to find information, that they will either have their own personal reason, whether they don't like the company, they don't like their terms, they don't like the way that they've treated other people, whatever it is, kind of thing, and that will be I believe that their reasoning for even entertaining something else. But outside of that, I just don't know what else there would be, just because
I think you made the point earlier about it being political. Like before we were just chatting before we started the session, you were saying that when you want to be informed about something, you'll look at it from a lot of different angles. I mean, people take the same approach to news, so I could see maybe a news one coming up with a similar thing. But if people want to investigate some topic where there is a range of different views and biases, well, here they could get definitely a broader range of opinions, right? So that's maybe another
it is
use.
Air out the echo
It is, but
that.
Not to interrupt, but I was going to say that the thing that I've faced too as well in having that same thought process early on, probably about a year ago, I thought to myself, I was like, maybe what it is that I'm making, people don't really want. Maybe they don't really care, because if they're stuck in their own, like you said, echo chamber, and they have cognitive bias about things, I mean, sure, it's great for people to try to be.
Yeah, people only want to be shown the facts that agree with their current world.
Society,
what they want and what they need.
Society does have
very
answers for this, and it's called education. And we can have a class about how to be more responsible online and in
It's the classic junk food versus healthy
we teach
food
children about
debate.
that as well. And you can teach that. Why is most of society using YouTube or Zoom or Netflix? It's because it became part of the language of the world. It's like, hey, what did you Netflix last night? I'm gonna Netflix tonight. Everyone is speaking the language, and thus people that are uneducated about the tech world find it easier to get entry into the tech world, right? But what if we just educate our next generations much better, make them find their own way much better? make the valuations better.
Is it Finland or Denmark? It's one of the Scandinavian countries where they saw this becoming a problem and have really strong education, even for adults, about how to spot fake news, how to fact check, always read an article before you share it, always check the sources, be aware of the bias.
Or even just like a starter pack for going online and have it all be some of the less commercial services that you can use, right? Like your website where you can find videos. I just looked at it. It scrolls archive.org. Archive.org, great thing to tell people about, right? Maybe people don't know about this. They're a website that will scroll journalistic articles, science articles. These are just handy links to give in education to any child in anywhere in the world. And yeah, governments will need to push that.
Just going back to what you said, Moraine, about the language, that was a really interesting point. And we say, I'm going to Zoom my friends. No, so Craig, what you need to do is a free little marketing for you. You need to make PeteyVid a verb. I'm just going to PeteyVid some videos later on.
It's so incredibly selective at this point with the vernacular because like nobody says I'm going to go Bing it or Yahoo it or credibly, you know.
But then do you say Zoom to Zoom someone?
I don't personally.
That's a new
no,
one.
because I use TeamViewer, I use Zoom, I use Anydesk. I mean, I'm not really particular.
To Skype is definitely a verb, right? Let's.
Yeah, that's true. But I think that there's this. I think there's certain longevity that follows that because Skype started, from what I remember, maybe like in 97, 98, like really early.
Yeah, true.
And then when you think about like when Netflix started, they started in, I want to say in like 96 or 97, a long time ago. Google 98. So maybe it is a longevity kind of thing where it just gets burned into society and our culture that you can't help but.
Maybe you need a phrasal verb, you know, just to
I don't know.
Set yourself apart. Like, let's PT up this video. Like,
I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, the thing that I'm hoping for, and that because the climate such is right now, that kind of people are up in arms, certain percentage of them, about having their content controlled by a limited number of media outlets. Like YouTube should be like studied in a way because it's the only thing that, in my knowledge, about us as consumers only having one of. I mean, can you imagine going into the store getting some toothpaste and there's only one kind? It's insane, but we've completely accepted this.
Yeah, it's a complete monopoly. Yeah,
we've totally accepted this. I mean, there are other options. Yes, you can go to Vimeo or Dailymotion, but not really. I mean, it's just not the same.
And also the key is when you Google for something,
yes,
you get the YouTube because
so there's a second layer. Yes, yes, second layer there. Yeah, absolutely.
You know why I think it's so popular is because they take films from these other platforms. Well, users can do it, right? It's not necessarily YouTube doing it, but a user can just take a Vimeo short film and they can upload it to YouTube, boom, and there it is. And then because there's more users there, they're probably it's gonna get more watch there, and then it leads to this spiral, doesn't it? So YouTube kind of hoovers everything up.
Yeah.
In terms of video hosting, who's going to compete other than Microsoft or Amazon? Who has the server farm capacity to compete here?
And this is key. Like, so I think there's this myth that the free market handles these things, and it evidently doesn't. And there's many examples. So I was talking to Craig earlier. There is something known as the Google kill space. And like the general advice, again, I'll come back to Peter Thiel's book. He says, what you need to look for something that on the surface seems like a bad idea, but if you dig deep enough into it, might be a good idea. And the reason for that is because if it's an obviously good idea, Google or Facebook or Amazon will already be making it, and you've got no chance. He actually advises that, and it's known as the Google kill zone. There's a bunch of area where there's no innovation because everyone knows if they went for it, if it was successful, the house would win and Google would sweep in and crush you. If you were lucky, they'd acquire you. More likely, they'd just get their 1,000 developers go, oh, look at that thing. It's working. Yeah, let's make that, but better. It stifles innovation. It's really dangerous.
You know, Google basically has been developing and strategically developing the YouTube offering for quite a long time and not had, if any, revenue for quite a long time in those beginning stages, and just kept raising more and more rounds of funding to support infrastructure to gain that market share. This is from my opinion and my understanding, but that is even from right. And not only that, they had practically no regulations, because I've gone and done research back to find stuff from really early on when YouTube was originally acquired by Google, and I found content on there that had stuff that was very like anti-Semitic. It was very much like, oh, this is why. Look at these ants. This is why white supremacy is a good thing, and it was totally on YouTube. Like, they didn't care. So they spent years basically getting as much market share, being completely open about that kind of stuff, whatever you want to say, liberal about those types of things, maybe not enforcing terms of service, maybe having the, yeah, because we just want people to have content here. So, and then they kept, reinvesting in infrastructure and getting that. It has to be strategic to a certain point. And then they're like, okay, now that we've gotten a certain point of market share, now we'll start to reel things in and bring the advertisers in, clean things up, clean house, turn on the fire hose, and here comes the money, right?
Well, yeah, let's be clear here. They didn't start cleaning house because they were worried about people viewing bad content. The advertisers were complaining. Right. Sorry, but you just put my ad next to an ISIS beheading. They were like, okay, we're sorry, advertisers, we'll clean up.
Well, and Alex Jones was on there for so long. No, they didn't care. I mean, there's all these videos.
He was very good for them, right?
Yeah.
He helped build the platform, arguably. He was one of the main earliest influencers, right? And it is that's the next generation of right-wing talk radio has been born from YouTube, and the fact that they were able to talk for 2 hours about gay frogs
right.
or whatever.
So, back to the original point, here's the thing is if they've gone through this process over, a decade or more strategically, for anyone to try to do that same kind of thing, it's impossible. It's not the right time. You wouldn't have the right kind of funding. So it's almost like impossible for anyone to compete with them at this point because their situation has been so strategic and so unique. It certainly seems that way to me, unless it's something specific like, Vimeo has HD, for example. So if you really want good, high quality stuff, you could go with them. Yeah.
So they got a monopoly.
There's a paid model for that. The paid model for that.
It is way better. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the only chance, right? You have to target a niche, right? You have to say, this is my beachhead, this is my niche. They're not doing this, I will do this better than anyone else. And then hope that they don't come along in a year's time and go, oh, that's a good idea, we'll copy that.
I've got a question then. Surely this is an antitrust issue.
We have laws for this, right? Yeah.
Don't regulations cover for that? Wasn't there the whole Microsoft antitrust scandal a while ago? I don't remember it in detail, but I mean, it's...
And being optimistic, I do think this is in the post. So governments don't move as quickly as tech companies, and we forget how new this whole industry is. But like you saw with Microsoft, governments have noticed, and governments do like issuing multi-billion-pound fines. They're quite popular. So I thought GDPR when it came out, I was like, okay, I get it. This is just a Google tax. This is just how they're finally going to tax Google because, So I do think it's coming. I think. Yeah. I almost think that these tech companies, it looks to me like they're going, oh, we're going to get fucked by antitrust, so let's just make as much hay while the sun's shining.
Seems a bit like that, doesn't it? It's like the oil company.
Because there's no avoiding it. Like they scale up, and that's how they make so much money. So rather than trying to avoid being that, they're like, no, let's just make as much money from it until we get caught, right?
But I mean, that's one of the founding sort of philosophies of America, right? It was like ride the gold train. Get as much as you can, and make your money and get out of there. I don't know. It's just, it fits. But then, why are the governments so slow? They could do that now, couldn't they?
Because it's a bunch of 80-year-old men.
It's famous, right? Governments and IT never worked out.
Like, do you remember when we were first learning about computers and it was some, 50-year-old lady that had recently gone on a course during the summer. She was there trying to teach a bunch of 12-year-olds how to use computers, and all the 12-year-olds were like, yeah, we know this.
We're better
so much better than you. I'm sorry. But Craig, how's it going? So, I mean, what's the path to monetization? Do you do things like Patreon or?
Yeah, so because I chose not to do that route of tracking user data and selling that, I said, well, I got to think up some other things. It became complicated, and it's not easy, obviously, but I have been able to keep the cost way down, and I do all the development for free myself. So outside of some friends helping me with some web related stuff, so I was like, I got to do some things that are both traditional and non-traditional. So I decided to go with a couple of affiliate programs through like eBay and Amazon, which don't make a ton of money, but if somebody clicks on a link that has to do with a search that they're doing, I can get some money from that. And then because my cat Petey and the brand and all that stuff, I decided to make merch. So I made t-shirts and stickers and that kind of thing, and a donation platform too as well. And then there's a Patreon additionally to that. And then believe it or not, I got one of my friends locally to help create a YouTube channel to try to monetize that all the YouTube videos are reviewing other search engines, which is kind of an interesting way to go. So we're a search engine, but I actually have him creating videos where he does real-time commentary on, like, we're going to try out DuckDuckGo. Let's see what it's like. Let's see what I don't like and what I do like. And then at the end of the video, he gives the search engine or the website a rating, which is like, he does it in like paw prints, like the cat's paws. It's,
I was going to say, how many PTs does this?
Well, they're actually the toe beans, which is the toe bean is the little paw print on the kitty cat's paw. So he does like ratings for these different search engines and stuff, and it's been going pretty well. And then he's made some other videos about, like, for example, how to find videos that have been removed from YouTube on our platform through the Internet Archive. So that's one thing that I've tried to do too, is add additional stuff on our search engine that you can't do in other places. I'm trying to think of what else. We're trying to reach a point that, like, obviously the channel will be monetized through YouTube because we're creating content that way. But definitely the Patreon and definitely the affiliate program, and then, like I said, selling merch through donations. But it takes a lot of traffic, to make decent money. And then for any website, there's always this delicate balance between, am I making enough money to pay for the infrastructure, to pay for the traffic? It's kind of this weird circular, formula, because if you get too much traffic, your website's not going to be able to keep up. And then is that traffic generate enough revenue to actually pay for the infrastructure, in a way? So I've been able to keep that down pretty well.
And is it ad free then, the service?
Mostly, yeah. There is a spot on there that if you came to us and said, hey, I want to buy a banner ad space or a text ad space, we do provide that. We haven't had anyone do that yet, so we're pretty much relying on the affiliate links that we have through Amazon and eBay. So if you're searching for, I don't know, a video on David Icke or something, you might find it, it's contextual, so it'll, click over to or hit Amazon's API and say, hey, here's David Icke's book on the lizard people or whatever. I don't know, and you might want to buy that. I don't know.
One of our favorite books here at Beyond Binary.
So things like that, and I'm still trying to figure out different ways to do that. The thing that makes it incredibly difficult is I've had other sites that have used monetization through like Google AdSense, and I know, like, the traffic in ratio to, like, what the return might be from several other instances. The thing that's, like, maddening me at this point is I'm getting enough traffic now that it could be generating pretty decent money if I was able to use AdSense. The problem is, because it's a privacy-focused search engine, I can't use AdSense because it would be completely hypocritical. So I've kind of shot myself in the foot. Yes,
exactly. Yeah.
So it's kind of like I'm getting enough traffic now that it would actually do quite well, well above and beyond the expenses, but I can't use it because I've kind of pigeonholed the offering into something that is prohibitive of that. So, and everybody knows.
Any entrepreneurs out there need to make an AdSense that doesn't. Advertising service that doesn't use your personal data.
Right.
Well,
yeah, or
speaking of
reshare that, or
PT ads.
So I genuinely am looking right now at advertising on your platform because so I spend quite a bit of money advertising on various platforms. I have my own software company. And yeah, like I think the big one for me was Facebook. So I was just trying them all out to see which one. And then I saw Facebook's involvement in genocide, and I was like, "Oh, that's bad," and I felt a bit shitty about that. And then I saw that they were like obstructing the United Nations investigation into their role in
allowing that
genocide.
as a bit.
And I was like, I think that's going to be the line in the sand for me. Like you have to draw a line somewhere, and when you're like not only contributing towards genocide, but obstructing an investigation into how to stop that happening. I was like, I'm going to stop throwing Facebook $3,000 a month. And just had to. And it was amazing reaching out to a bunch of people about this and saying like, hey guys, like, this is da-da-da. And the backlash was fierce. Everyone was like, oh no, like if you don't understand that we're here to, get ads in front of as many eyeballs as possible. And if you don't get that, you need to leave marketing, bro. Like you don't get it. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like IBM made computers for the Holocaust, but you have to draw a line in the sand somewhere. So anyway, the positive way of saying that, Craig, is I will genuinely reach out to you after this and see if I can try some adverts on your platform.
Sure.
I'd love to support something that isn't a big evil corporation for a change.
The other thing to that effect, not to take the conversation in a completely different direction, but in regards to Facebook and Facebook ads, I did try, and this is on the promotional side, not necessarily the revenue return side, but obviously you can't just start up a website on the internet and expect people to find you and come to you and everything's fine. You have to do a lot of work, way more work than you ever had in the past, considering how many people are on this planet, how many websites there are. And so after creating the PeteyVid thing, I was like, well, maybe I can put some Facebook ads up to get more likes, that kind of thing, and ended up spending a decent amount of money to get a good amount of likes, and tried different ones, to like the cheapest ones in some regions that are like non-conventional, to ones that were kind of more I guess more expensive and more politically motivated here in the United States. And what I've found is, and again, this is just could be my bad luck or me not doing it right, spent a good amount of money and got a lot of followers or likes rather on Facebook. But what I've ended up finding was the engagement, it was incredibly low, even though I have an insane amount of likes, which is kind of weird, because you think, hey, I'm going to spend this money, I'll get all these likes, and then I'll post stuff, and then people will go there, and then they'll share it. Not necessarily the case. Not at all.
Like a lot of people, it was the Israel-Palestine episode. So I called it controversy, and I went for fans of the Birthright Israel page and fans of the Free Palestine page, and I advertised our podcast episode with a controversial guest. He was an Israeli but of Arab descent, so he could kind of see both sides of the story and see the bias in the media coverage on either side, right? And as you say, kicked off a massive war in the comments. But how many of those people are hanging around afterwards? Not really many. And I think you have a combination of sort of the bot farms, right? So you get them to like your page, but there's nothing there afterwards. And also people that are just arguing on Facebook, and that when you're like, oh, here's a 2-hour podcast episode I made.
I'm not going to listen to your podcast. I'm just
shouting at people in the comments. Don't really care about
somebody
that.
even just said, I'm not going to listen because, and it's like...
Right here.
Then why are you here? why am I arguing with you at 2 a.m? God damn it, Facebook, you got me again.
So I have a question about the podcast farm thing. I've never completely understood what the benefit of that side of things would be to engage that on their side.
The benefit from who to engage what, sorry?
Say you're a bot farm and you own that. What is the benefit to what it is that you're doing? I mean...
okay, so...
you see what I mean?
Yeah, what often happens with these bot farms is that in order not to get busted as a bot, they just like a bunch of random stuff. So there's just white noise. They like 20,000 different things.
Oh, so they're involved in other activities as well.
And then,
that's the piece I didn't know.
So they just make white noise and like a bunch of random stuff. And then because of that, it appears like a valid 2-year-old account. And then it can be used to like stuff when they need.
Okay.
So that's the white noise that hides the fact that they're a bot farm. Because if they only like certain things and certain times, it would be too suspicious and obvious.
Now I understand. Yeah, because I assumed that they were just only liking things, and I'm like, why would you even do that? But
they just
you're right.
Like
if it's to create,
that comes up, they just like every 4th thing in the feed, right? And so if you're paying to advertise, it will get liked by bot farms. You can help it somewhat by excluding a bunch of countries. So a lot of bot farms are in Russia, Bangladesh, sort of like some of the places you'd assume. But it's a big problem with if you pay for likes on social media, everything you then post, you're paying every time you then boost the advertising, because these things don't want you to pay once and then forget, right? So they start turning the volume down, then the only way you get that is to pay again, and you end up paying to show your ads to bots, and the bots like it, and you're like, oh, this is going well. Oh, my stuff is really well received by a bunch of random bots. Apparently not, no. I don't know. The Android stream of electric podcasts. We will find out.
No, good to know. Yeah, I've been wondering about that for a while, so thanks.
You're welcome. And likewise, thank you. It was a really interesting and illuminating conversation. And I wish you the very best of luck with everything. And I will genuinely reach out to see if I can try some ads on your platform.
Yeah, sure.
I'll bookmark this
out for sure.
Brilliant. Yeah, so we'll do links in the show notes below. Does anyone have any final thoughts on how we can free ourselves from the social media?
Well, I wanted to just say one thing, that during this sort of month off social media, I think I'll probably end up going back, but it's really interesting to use as a tool, but we just got to be conscious about how we use it. So what I was doing before was using some limiting apps, some blockers, which basically you can set the parameters of how much time you want to spend on whichever websites, any websites, even PeteyVid, although I'd put that as unlimited. But for example, Facebook, you put like 10 minutes a day. You know, YouTube, 30 minutes, and you can set custom macros. There's one called Leech Block. There's another one that's for Firefox. There's another one which is only for Chrome, which is Stay Focused. And these ones, they really help you to define how much time you want to give, because, you know, your time is pretty valuable, you know, and you can set.
And it's quite scary when
really
you
look
realise how much
into
time
it. You
you're
think
wasting arguing with random strangers.
So, and you can have it do certain things. One thing I was doing with YouTube was after 20 minutes was changing the site to black and white.
Oh, I see.
Right, so it's a lot less appealing when all the videos are in black and white. But I'm colorblind anyway, right? So
right, so it doesn't cut you off, but it does. It makes it like, and you get that notification.
Yeah, it's like, you know,
been on
you've
this
spent
for
20
long,
minutes
and
and now it's
really
black and
want
white,
to-
and you're like, okay, well, I'll finish the video. Do you know what I mean? It's not going to cut me off. But then I'm like, okay, now I should go and do some work or
Right,
whatever
but
it is, right?
I kind of like this, and on the other hand, like, it's sort of giving the AI control over what you're doing in your day, like hard limiting it. Because I like to have kind of the freedom to just watch CNN for 5 days, 24/7.
Yeah, but I don't want to do that, right?
Just for the election,
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
election,
turn
and
it
she
off.
jonking, pointing at the same map over and over and over again. And, you know, next week I will not watch CNN again. In 4 years, I'll watch
You can
CNN
turn it
again.
off.
And, you know, like, where do you
turn it
give
off,
the
you
control?
decide, right?
Because
Also, Finn, I'm imagining if you were looking at the election map and then it
Easier,
turned black
I
and
think,
white, that'd be very
depending if you're
confusing.
colourblind or not. But my point is, you set it, and then you can change the settings, right? And then also you can have a mode like go nuclear. So like for an hour, it blocks all websites except like ones you need, like PeteyVid, Google, DuckDuckGo. Do you know what I mean? Wikipedia, so that you can really focus in. So it's just a tool to help you to limit that, and I found it useful personally. So I'd recommend people check that out. Leech Block, Stay Focused, these kind of screen time on the iPhone. There's similar ones for Android. So that would be my closing statement.
Definitely.
Take a bit of control
Yeah, sounds
back
good.
and, you know, set the parameters of how you want to use these tools. Anyone else got any closing gambits?
So I think we just need more legislation, more education around these things. Government needs to speed up. We need some young, tech-savvy people within the government to keep up with technology. Or we'll see the corporations, the tech corporations, taking more and more control away from
I
government.
agree with all those
Especially,
points.
yeah.
I think those are excellent. I just wanted to thank everybody, all you guys, for great, nice, pseudo-random conversation all over the place. It's been really enjoyable. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks to you, man.
Yeah, thanks.
Brilliant. No, thanks for coming. Absolute pleasure. My closing thoughts is like, guys, please join me. That there are too many people who are wrong on the internet, and with just a little bit more hours spent on Facebook per day, we could correct them all.
We can beat them.
I'm really optimistic. just. Thank you so much for joining us, Craig, and yeah, thank you all for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Craig.
Thank you.
Now on BBC Radio 4 we present The First Trip. This programme's broadcast in surround sound, so to enjoy the full effects, if you have a home cinema system, you should listen using that. The power of a new generation.
stop recording. Dad, smash it. Why don't I?